US President Joe Biden has called for unity against Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Biden was speaking on the sidelines of a G7 summit meeting in Germany. G7 nations are facing growing pressure to show that they're tackling the global economic crisis. The war in Ukraine has disrupted global supply chains and sent the prices of food, fuel to record highs and further creating humanitarian crises across the world.
We have to stay together, because Putin has been counting on from the beginning. And somehow NATO would, and the G7 would splinter, but we haven't, and we're not going to. So we can't let this aggression take the form it has and get away with it.
A free, independent, sovereign country like Ukraine should not be violently invaded and should not have its boundaries changed by force. And the consequences of that, of what's happening for the world, are tough. But the price of backing down, the price of allowing Putin to succeed, to hack off huge parts of Ukraine, to continue with his program of conquest, that price will be far, far higher, and everybody here understands that.
On food security, we don't need speeches, we need actions, we need to decide, we need measures, and we have a clear vision about what are the different scopes that we need to develop together with our partners and friends in the framework of the G7. First of all, it's important to make everything which is possible in order to unblock the Black Sea, and I hope as soon as possible an agreement will be possible in order to make possible for Ukraine to export through the Black Sea.
Greenpeace activists are calling on G7 leaders to end the use of fossil fuels. And they say that fossil fuel corporations are driving global warming to dangerous levels. Activists unrolled a banner on Germany's highest mountain, the Zugspitze. They are calling on G7 leaders to adopt a clear commitment to energy transition that will end all forms of fossil fuels by 2035. The G7 summit, which takes place annually, will this year focus on issues such as Russia's war in Ukraine, climate change, energy, and a looming food security crisis. Well, for some reaction, we're now joined by Max Lawson, who's head of Inequality Policy and Advocacy for Oxfam International. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So we're seeing what Greenpeace activists are campaigning for with the G7 grouping. Are you on board with their demands as Oxfam?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all on the same page in that, the climate crisis is out of control. I've just recently returned from living in Kenya for some years, and, incredible level of drought, massive problems with crops, and food prices were already starting to rise significantly since March last year because of the climate crisis. So we now have obviously the war in Ukraine making that much worse. So here at the G7, very much people joining the dots between these multiple crises and demanding action. As we well know, and in South Africa, the people are still reeling from the economic impact of COVID-19, and we still have only 18% of people in African nations fully vaccinated. And now we have a food crisis that's driving the price of oil, the price of cooking oil or flour doubling in some places in the space of a few months. So I've been following the G7 and these crises for a long time. I've never seen anything this bad. And I think at the same time, you're seeing an explosion in wealth at the top. So we've had the biggest increase in billionaire wealth that we've ever seen. We've got 62 new food billionaires, so people who've become billionaires because they're making money out of selling food. You've seen one company, Cargill, one of the biggest food companies in the world. It's a family company. They had 8 billionaires in the family. Now, just a short while later, they have 12 billionaires in one family, all making money out of food and energy. So it's not the case that everyone's losing out. There are some big winners out there, and what we want the G7 to do is to tax those corporations, tax those rich individuals, use that money to support agriculture in Africa, to support ordinary people to cope with these terrible increases in prices.
Recently, I saw that you said that the conduct of rich countries at the WTO was utterly shameful. Are they behaving shamefully even now when it comes to climate change? I see that Germany is pushing for the G7 to sort of push back from their commitment to stop financing overseas fossil fuels projects by the end of the year. What are your thoughts on this backtracking? I suppose they might say we didn't foresee Russia invading Ukraine.
No, they didn't foresee Russia invading Ukraine, it's true, but this is not the right time to be backtracking on climate commitments and the commitment to get out of fossil fuels. You know, we only have a few years left to stop climate breakdown, and as we know best in the continent of Africa, you know, climate change is not something in the future, it's happening right now. You know, people can't remember the last time we had normal seasons, and having a huge impact on people's lives. So it is a real betrayal by Germany, and particularly the Green Party in Germany who are in government, to be pushing to row back on these commitments that were made at the COP meeting in Glasgow last year. And it does come on top of 2 weeks later a complete betrayal of developing nations, where President Ramaphosa's proposal, together with the Indian government, to waive the patents on intellectual property on vaccines. 100 developing nations supported this move, and it was completely squashed by the European Union, who wanted to protect the interests of their pharmaceutical firms. And it's really sad, because, you know, global crises need global solutions, and they need the most powerful nations on earth, of which the G7 are some of the most powerful, to do the right thing. And sadly, they're not doing the right thing. They're putting their own self-interest against the future of the planet.
We talk about commitments, we talk about pledges to finance mitigation and development, particularly in the developing nations, by these richer nations, but it does seem to be stuck at pledge point. Are you seeing any movement at all?
We are seeing some. I mean, we're going to see some more money for food pledged in the next 2-3 days. Not nearly enough, but still some new money. And I think, you know, it would be unfair to say the G7 are not aware of the food crisis, and they're also aware of the politics of the food crisis, and they don't want, you know, the war in Ukraine to lead to, you know, millions starving around the world. So I think we will see some money, but it won't be enough. And I think the key area where we would like to see action, and I don't think it will happen, is on the issue of debt repayments, because we have a situation now where the least developed countries, for every dollar they're receiving in aid, they're having to repay $2 in debt repayments. And because of inflation, the Federal Reserve is putting up the interest rate. Every time the Fed in the US puts up the interest rate just 1%, that's an additional $35 billion of debt repayments for the poorest countries, because their debt is denominated in dollars, and they have to pay higher interest. So this debt crisis is getting absolutely critical. So it seems crazy to give a little bit of money for food and then take it all back in debt repayments. So we hope that the G7 will begin to realise that, and that the calls for much greater and deeper debt cancellation for large numbers of countries to help them have the money to help their own citizens to get through this food crisis is what we need, as well as, you know, a few more pledges on the table.
All right, let's go back to the WTO issue, and I know that this is one of the big things that you champion. You were at the G7 summit to Oxfam calling for a comprehensive waiver on IP, on vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics. The WTO gave some concessions. Was that not enough? What needs to happen?
It was definitely not enough. There were some very minor concessions, but it was very much closer to the position that the European Union has had from the beginning of the pandemic, which is they don't want to see any waiver of intellectual property rights. and very far away from the much more comprehensive proposal of South Africa and India, which would have made a big difference. It was still something, and it was a testament, if you like, to the championing of this issue by Ramaphosa and his government and others and campaigners around the world, that the European Union and others at least felt they had to do something at the WTO 2 weeks ago, but it really wasn't enough, certainly not enough to enable the mass production of generic vaccines in developing countries, which is what we need. We're heading into a situation in the autumn where, once again, we have 2 new vaccines produced by Moderna and Pfizer that are specifically designed to tackle Omicron and the newer variants. And they've already been bought up by rich nations. The majority of these vaccines have been ordered by rich countries. And again, they're hidden behind patents and monopolies, and Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna are making $1,000 a second in profit. So this issue of the need to put public health and the public good ahead of private profit, still very real. And we will keep fighting on this patent issue, because it's vital for this pandemic and for future pandemics.
I was just about to ask, because, you know, by and large, masks seem to be falling off now. And the pandemic is being treated more as something we live with than something that threatens us as much as it did before. So the demands you're making, could they be about setting up principles about vaccines generally, not just for COVID?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is what rich countries did. I mean, the proposal to waive patents was made, you know, nearly a year and a half ago by South Africa and India at the height of the pandemic, and it would have made a huge difference. It would have made developing countries would have had the ability to produce far more vaccines a lot quicker. They would have vaccinated their people a lot quicker. So there are many people in South Africa and around the world who are dead today because of what was done in terms of defending patents. So it's important to not let that pass, you know, to mark the fact that it was a crime of historic proportions to put the profits of Pfizer ahead of the people of South Africa, and many other nations. But yes, we are in a position now where they dragged their heels so long that we ended up, luckily, with a variant Omicron that has almost done their job for them, because everyone on Earth has more or less now had COVID, and that's created antibodies. But that doesn't protect us necessarily against a more deadly variant emerging. It doesn't protect us against the future. And it doesn't give us a system that's prepared for future pandemics, whether it's monkeypox or polio has just broken out again in London for the first time in 20 years. So, you know, we need to have a system in place globally that we can react to these health problems in a way that's rational and that puts people's health ahead of the profits of a few small companies.
Max Lawson, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And let's hope that this G7 grouping plus will listen to some of these desperate cries. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, that's Max Lawson, Head of Inequality Policy and Advocacy for Oxfam International, with his wish list for the G7 nations that are currently gathering.